Welcome back. It's time for Opinion Court. Get in touch with us on 22422. That's our SMS line. If you're online, please use the hashtag Opinion Court. We're asking you a question. Whether you think the president should retain his cabinet, and you are not mincing any words in your position. 19% saying yes, 81% saying no. The poll is still running on our Twitter and Facebook page. Please do go ahead and vote and give us your reasons. We'll be sampling some of them in this newscast. Well, the cabinet of Kenya is made up of the president, the deputy president, the attorney general, and cabinet secretaries. The 2010 Constitution of Kenya allows a maximum of 22 ministries. I beg your pardon for that little fly that's disturbing us tonight. Well, a cabinet secretary is not a member of the Kenyan parliament and has to be vetted by a parliamentary committee before their appointment. Cabinet secretaries are evaluated based on a performance contracting mechanism. Well, in a nutshell, there are three key parameters that are used to gauge their performance. The first is fiscal discipline. With a budget that is over 1 trillion shillings, ministries are expected to absorb the funds allocated to them and use them prudently to deliver on government's objectives. The government probes how locally sourced and externally mobilized resources are used. How was recurrent expenditure used as well? They will also look at compliance with the Public Finance Management Act. The ministries with revenue targets, whether they meet these goals, is also factored in. Well, another key indicator is ministry-specific targets, and here cabinet secretaries will be evaluated on how they have performed based on the flagship programs in the ministry. They are tasked with implementing an aggressive Jubilee development agenda, and their performance in these areas will affect the president's legacy. And finally, there is the question of procurement targets. Well, here they evaluate performance that is based on law and policies such as the Buy Kenya, Build Kenya policy that was announced in 2015, which requires that 40% of all goods and services procured by the government at all levels are locally produced, saving local producers from obliteration by cheap imports from countries like India and China. While other key policies include that of the 35% of procurement going to women, youth, and persons living with disabilities. And so with that being the backdrop of our conversation, joining me now in studio to discuss both the politics and the technical issues that will surround President Uhuru Kenyatta's pick for cabinet now are Francis Gashuri. He is, of course, a senior political reporter for Citizen TV and a show host on Inoro TV. Macharia Gaitho is an independent journalist. Edward Kisiangani is our resident political analyst, and John Kinuthia is a research analyst from the International Budget Partnership, which is a civil society organization that checks if budgets are effectively used to fight poverty. And so you're all welcome to the program. Let's start by listening in to the Jubilee Vice Chair, David Murathe, and what he had to say in terms of the composition of cabinet.
I think the president is a lot like his father, and he prefers continuity, and he prefers, if people have performed, not to disrupt the order. However, those who have not delivered, and mark you, Francis, now the president knows all of us. He knows all his CSs. He knows all his PSs. He knows who has delivered and who has delivered. So if anybody is going to be dropped, it is because in his own estimation and opinion, he did not live up to the expectations of the challenge and the responsibility that they were given by the president in the just ended term.
You know, Prof, ideally, a cabinet should be made up of individuals who have the best possible competencies to deliver on key government objectives. But the manner in which they end up being in the cabinet is a highly political process full of lobbying, isn't it?
Yes, it is true that when you go to cabinet, you must probably have some people that know your competency. That is not out of order. It happens everywhere in the world, so you cannot condemn anybody for that. But then, looking at our cabinet, I think most of the people really qualified to do the job in terms of hiring and so on. So you cannot take that away from them. So if they are incompetent, it is not exactly because they don't have the competency or the skills to do the job. It is just probably they are a bit lethargic, or they are used to bad manners. But it cannot it cannot be that because they were handicapped, because they were also backed by a highly technical team. So the way Deputy Murathi is putting it, I think this is a very diplomatic way of saying this is the wishful thinking of the president, that he would have requested to continue with the people that he has around him, but probably circumstances will force him to change personnel based on a poor performance or good performance. That is what he's likely to do.
Francis, what's the most important question the president is going to want to answer when choosing this cabinet?
Regional balancing, because he's coming in at a time when the country is very polarized politically, and so he must be seen to accommodate all shades of interest in the country, bearing in mind that there's a huge chunk of this country that does not recognize his presidency, so to say, especially from the opposition team NASA. And so he would be compelled to reach out to them, and the best way to demonstrate that is to be seen to play the inclusivity card.
Would he pick from their rank and file?
Not necessarily, but from the regions that ordinarily support the National Super Alliance. But also, he has to mix a bit of that with merit and competencies, as Prof says, because even as you reach out and seek to include, you must also ensure that you bring on board people who are competent. And thirdly, there's a lot of political loyalty to deal with. He made very many promises. He promised so many people so many things, and this is the reward time. And bearing in mind that there are people who even defected from the opposition and came to government with the promise that, or with the hope that they are going to be rewarded with something. Unfortunately, there are only 22 positions to give out. He cannot give everybody. So it's that delicate balancing act of rewarding political loyalty, regional balancing, gender question has also to play in. And like the first term, there's also the succession politics around it. And so we must look at the composition of the cabinet with that eye. That even as he seeks all those other things, there's that silent question of the succession and ultimately his legacy, because he must be remembered for something, delivery, and so he must get in office people who can help him do the delivery.
Macharia, who are the people you think the president would be keen to consider when it comes to loyalty and to accord them quote-unquote bendera? Obviously there are lots of other government jobs, but cabinet appears to be for the creme de la creme. So who do you think would be top on such a list?
I think we saw a lot of that during the campaigns. People who were wooed in from the opposition, or some Jubilee people who withdrew from the race on the promise that they'll get something, but it was never specified what exactly they'll get. It may have been an expectation that it will be a cabinet post, but one could still be made ambassador to Papua New Guinea and such places. But I think you could look at people who were what you might call very, very prominent politicians who expected to be in parliament or in the Senate, but pulled out because of they were asked to pull out, or they defected from the opposition to Jubilee. I think there's a lot of those people who will be expecting something, whether it is people like Omar Hassan, who has caused it up to Jubilee after the elections. Same with Peter Munya. There are people like Isaac Ruto, who of course was a member of the key guys in of NASA, and he withdrew. He'll also be expecting something. Not necessarily cabinet. We still have to wait and see, especially in terms of, does he want to only reward politicians, or does he want to go back to his promise of putting competence and skills first? Yeah, and
that could be what rocks the Jubilee boat, because it means horse trading with what was formerly the URP side of the party.
I think the biggest challenge is going to be that horse trading. You have a president who probably will want, as Francis said, to secure his legacy. To secure his legacy means delivering. Delivering means having the right people in the right place. Competence, skills, professionals. There is the URP wing of Jubilee, Deputy President William Ruto, which is thinking of the succession, and that is going to create a conflict. because for them they'll be more interested in political rewards and you know, the horse trading of politics.
Right.
So that I think is probably going to play a very big role in coming days and weeks.
Okay, gentlemen, we have a lot of names to vet, and Kinuthi, I'd love you to jump in terms of just looking at how these CSs manage to absorb government funds very shortly as we start to look at them one by one. And we want to start with Dr. Hassan Wario Arero. He, of course, is the Cabinet Secretary for the Ministry of Sports, Culture and Arts. The mandate of that ministry is to develop and coordinate sports, promote the national culture, heritage, and develop the film industry. He is a professional gentleman because he is a Kenyan anthropologist. He has worked in, you know, British museums for over 8 years before coming home. He also fits the bill in terms of bringing in marginalized communities. He hails from the Borana community. He has some achievements: establishment of the Anti-Doping Association of Kenya. He led the Kenyan delegation to Monaco in 2014 in a bid to host the 2017 IAAF Under-18 Athletics Championships. Kenya won the rights to that. In the Jubilee Manifesto, however, they promised 5 world-class stadia that have never materialized. There was, of course, the Rio Olympics 2016 fiasco, where the senior National Olympics Committee of Kenya and the Ministry of Sports officials were implicated in mistreating athletes and the embezzlement of funds. Kenya was blacklisted by IAAF and the IOC for failing to set up proper anti-doping processes and placed on a watch list. There is the increased number of Kenyan athletes who are being discovered and banned for doping, the failure to effectively rein in on squabbling sports federations. I mean, I could go on with this list and it doesn't sound very good. So, Macharia, let's start with you. I mean, he's an anthropologist, okay, so you're right for that ministry, but what's going on in sports?
I'm starting with Hassan Wario is depressing. It's like starting with but the bad news.
Oh dear.
But maybe it is not that bad. We talk a lot about the failures of the Rio Olympics and the scandals and the disorganization. But the fact is that we had our best Olympic performance ever. We've had great successes in athletics throughout the period, whether it is the big city marathons or the Grand Prix circuit. We've had great successes there. Sevens rugby, we've had great successes there, and you can name a lot of women's netball. We've maintained our, not netball, volleyball. We've maintained our place at the top of Africa. But I would say this is not because of Wario, or it's not because of the government. It is because of the sports people and maybe where their federations are working properly. But where things are going wrong, they will always go wrong. Again, because of bad management. Football is a classic example where things will always go wrong. We will never perform. There is corruption. They will.
Goodness.
But let me
never perform. We will never perform.
Well, we can only hope so. But from what we see, we might as well give up on soccer and concentrate on other things.
Okay.
But yet, look at Hassan Wario. What can he do in some of those things? There is a lot of autonomy in terms of sports associations. You try and interfere with the Kenya Football Federation, or Football Kenya, what they call it these days, you're banned by FIFA. Whether it is rugby or hockey or athletics, they're all run by independent associations. The minister's leeway to interfere is limited, and that is right. But where things are clearly going wrong, where there is corruption, for instance, there is no reason why it should not extend beyond the ministry and go to the director of public prosecutions.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. So should he stay or go? Finally, stay. Go.
If you look at the checklist of what he's supposed to have delivered on, what we have is phantoms. We have, during the campaigns, we were told 9 international stadiums, and they don't exist. Let's face it.
Stay or go.
Go.
Oh, whoa.
In fact, let me put it this way. The breaking news of the day, when the president unveils his list of cabinet nominees, will be if Hassan Wario Daktari is retained. That will be the breaking news.
That's a little harsh, Gashuri.
It will be the breaking news. That's my personal opinion, because I mean, the sports people have a serious problem with him. I'm an enthusiast of sports, and I know quite a number of people have a problem with him. You see, when you're a minister, you're supposed to instill confidence in the ministry that you run, in the ministry that you manage. If the people working under that ministry and the organizations and the associations that work in that docket don't draw a lot of confidence from you, then there's a problem.
Oh dear.
But of course, such things reach or will reach the president here. So I will be extremely surprised if he's retained.
Okay, good luck, old chap. Let's move on now to...
I would also vote in for... I think he should not be retained.
Okay. Well, you know, I'm going to spec in with here because he really just wants to speak on fiscal performance. How did he perform? Are there issues there in terms of the Ministry of Sports and Culture?
Well, not really. You know, interestingly, the State Department that the ministry that he runs is actually one with one of the smallest budgets in government. And it's interesting that it's been one of the most famous, not for the best of reasons. But at the same time, I think when you look at in terms of the absorption of the budget, the ministry does pretty well. But on the flip side, when you look at our audits, the ministry is not one of those with what we call unqualified audit opinions, which basically means clean opinions. So in a way, there is a couple of challenges also in terms of the fiscal discipline in that ministry. And you know, every year when we were looking at budgets, we kept looking to see whether there are allocations for these 5 stadiums. And to the current year, what we see is refurbishment of stadiums. So there are a couple of things, even when you're looking at the budget and how the ministry has actually been spending money, that actually do work a bit against that ministry.
Okay, and worked against the cabinet secretary in that respect. Okay, but 3 to 4, what a vote. All right, we have to move on to the cabinet secretary for foreign affairs, Ambassador Amina Mohammed. Of course, the objective and the mandate of her ministry is to promote, project and protect Kenya's interests and image globally through innovative diplomacy and contribute towards a just and peaceful and equitable world. Some of her achievements as CS, she's been instrumental in restructuring, reforming and rationalizing Kenya's Ministry of Foreign Affairs and its missions abroad, and chaired the team that drafted Kenya's foreign trade policy. She's credited for many of the high-profile visits that Kenya has had from foreign heads of state and dignitaries, as well as the increased international conferences that Kenya has hosted. She has often been rumored to be seeking a return to the United Nations system from which she came. Gashuri, she's seen as a performer. Is the real question here whether the government will be able to keep her?
I think Amina is one of those CSs who has been out there. I mean, she's all over, you can see her. And not one of those people that would say is desperate for the flag. I mean, she has very many options, even if she's not retained in the cabinet. For her, I think it's more the government or the president trying to retain her in the cabinet than her not getting a position. When you look at the first term of the presidency, and especially for a president who came in with a questionable international image, remember the minimum contact?
Right,
yeah?
Exactly.
Yeah. So she has managed to do that well, and the whole question of ICC and how she navigated it may not have been very popular with some quarters, and especially the civil society, on how she played her role in dealing with the ICC question. But in government quarters, I think she has done very well, and they would want to retain her.
Prof, let me ask you this, because you know you've talked about her contribution in terms of helping reform Kenya's international image, and that is of course intertwined with the head of state. But he's been, if you like, the blue-eyed boy abroad, but in the neighborhood, not so much. We have troubles from our neighbors. You know, Uganda is still giving us issues, Tanzania as well. So we seem to be doing quite well internationally, but closer home, perhaps receiving a bit of a cold shoulder from other East African countries. Has she failed in that respect?
I don't think you can blame that on her. I think there are quite very many intricate situations here. The policy that we have with Uganda, foreign policy to Uganda, foreign policy for Tanzania, all these are determined by heads of state, and they're dictated by other things. She could just do just that much. She can't go beyond certain things. So probably she can propose certain things, but you see how she handled how she responded to the
Tanzania
Tanzania case. Then she said, you know, we don't want to make a big issue out of this. We probably will think of compensating our own. That's really very disarming. So probably she doesn't have the necessary control over the matter, but
let me ask you this. A lot of families have taken exception to the role that the ministry has played, I beg your pardon, especially when Kenyan nationals have been detained abroad. You remember the South Sudan case, the Uganda case over Migingo, and they have often said that the government has not, and her office has not been assertive enough in terms of bringing Kenyans back home.
There are certain things that happen in the international circles which never reach the public. The public have their own way of looking at things. Certain people could be involved in actually just breaking the law of a neighboring country, and then when you go there, you are told that this fellow came here and probably stole this, and the law says this. Would you still forgive them if you are in your own country? So each case should be looked at on its own merit. I think if you go to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, you discover there are so many things. I have been lucky to read some of the things and even to talk to some of my students who have gone there. I think they do a lot of things that don't come to the limelight. So we can't blame that to Amina Mohammed. I think she's a quintessential diplomat, and for me, it doesn't matter whether I agree with some of the things she has done or not, but in terms of efficiency and serving the government that appointed her, she has done extremely well. I think President Kenyatta would really, if she's given a UN job, that's a different matter. But if she is, she's not, Amina Mohammed should be the first one on the president's list.
To retain.
Okay.
I think she's performed commendably. She's done well. There is no reason to drop her. I just wish that if she gets a reappointment, she'll be more of Kenya's foreign minister rather than Uhuru's foreign minister. We are done with ICC. It is no longer a Jubilee thing. There is so much more that Kenya needs to pursue, and I think we really need to step up the game. We need to see more proactive engagement from our ambassadors and high commissioners abroad. I can tell you that apart from one or two, the rest are just there. You don't see them, you don't hear them, you don't know what they do. They're just there. You don't see them enunciating Kenya's position on any international issue, on Kenya's policy. Where there are Kenyans in trouble abroad, you do not see our ambassadors intervening. I can tell you today, if an American citizen or a British or a German is arrested for drug trafficking, their envoys will take up their case. Not necessarily to lobby for them to be released, but just to make sure that they're not mistreated and that they get a fair trial.
Right.
Kenyans get arrested in the US, in Germany, in Sudan, they're mistreated. Not a word from our envoys, not a visit, nothing. Okay. And I think that really should be part of the thing. The other issue is the things around East Africa. There's a problem there because the East African docket is separate from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs docket.
That's true.
So some things that are happening around community issues are not in her docket.
Okay.
And maybe there is an overlap there, and maybe that is something which needs to be resolved.
Okay, but in terms of spending?
So it's interesting, just picking up from where Macharia left, because in the ministry a sizable proportion of the budget there is actually spent in these foreign missions. And if you look at the years from 2013 coming up to 2015, up to the year 2015-2016, actually the ministry was doing pretty well in spending. So you would assume that a lot of that money is going into something useful in those missions. But this is one of the ministry, unfortunately, that in one of those years actually had an adverse opinion in the Auditor General's report. So an adverse opinion is simply to say there was some very serious issues in how they spent money, and that is one of the queries that actually I think that will go to this ministry, and it will be a question of, are there systemic challenges in terms of the fiscal discipline in this ministry that need to be looked at? And
there's the issue of the numerous foreign trips and what it came up to. How significant is that?
Well, you know, the foreign trips are also not all spent under this ministry. So county assemblies and their foreign trips are basically with their own budget.
But those of the presidency?
But for the presidency, definitely that is something that will be brought up. but also the presidency has its own budget for travel, domestic and foreign. But when you look at the travel that is under this ministry is also the highest at the national level, but it's simply because these envoys are moving back and forth. But I think the question will be to ask, in terms of what the foreign envoys are doing and what the ministry is doing generally, working on policy around generally around our foreign policy, is whether there are challenges and loopholes in terms of how we spend money, and that's why the Auditor General raised issues about the ministry.
Okay.
But Annie, also just a little, yes, I know, a little addition. The ambassadors, because it is tied to what Mashari is saying, these ambassadors and the high commissioners could be inefficient, true. But you must remember that in terms of recruitment, Amina Mohammed doesn't have a big say on who becomes our ambassador. So they are directly responsible, answerable to the president, and that is why you cannot blame her for the inefficiency of the...
You think the CS should have a greater say, perhaps?
Yeah?
Should the CS have a greater say?
Yes. Okay. Probably if they that is because these are direct appointees of the president. Some people are picked for political reasons, and so Amina Mohammed has nothing to do with that.
Fair enough. We need to move on to Honorable Dan Kazungu. He was the MP for Malindi constituency on an ODM ticket, but then ended up being appointed CS after being seen to cozy up a bit too much to the Jubilee administration. The Ministry of Mining has been one of those ministries that really hasn't caught any headlines per se, but you know, it deals with minerals exploration, mining policy management, inventory and mapping of mineral resources, and that sort of thing. Some of the achievements perhaps is the modernization of mineral lab services. There's proposal to set up a university that will be doing some technical training for the key services needed. There's the establishment of a geodata bank. Prof, you know, he picks 3 boxes that are important. I mean, he comes from the right part of the country. He is young. This is about rewarding a loyalist. But now, given the last election, there are other people who may tick similar boxes coming from the right region and also have real political acumen. For instance, Gideon Mungaro or any of the other coast leaders. Do you think he stands a chance coming back?
You see, I have never understood what he does as a citizen. I used to hear about mining when Najib Balala was there, and I would hear him, you know, talking about licensing, taking care of our minerals underground. But since Dan Kazungu took the leadership of the ministry, I hear very little. So I think probably he does his things quietly, but in terms of perception, we as members of the public, we think probably he's still adjusting to the seat. And how long can he take to do this adjustment? So maybe he has a smaller budget, but he must have, we want to hear his voice. Given the job he's doing, what does he want to do with the ministry?
Stay or go?
In my opinion, he should just go.
In fact,
okay.
I don't feel Dan Kazungu. I get the feeling that he was pulled from the ODM side, from the parliament, put into the cabinet, and he's just happy being in the cabinet. He doesn't have to do any work. He's just happy being in the cabinet. Being from the coast particularly, and being Minister for Mining,
yes,
should be something very big, because there are some massive deposits at the coast, and yet we don't see how the coast is benefiting. One is Tayomin. I don't know whether the coast, Kwale, benefits, the people of Kwale benefits at all from titanium mining. Everything is exported, and maybe just the company that does the exploitation is benefiting. I don't see what is in the local economy that benefits the people. We have the mineral sands in both in Kwale and Kilifi. Those things came up a lot of time during Najib Balala's time, because there was a lot of pushing and pulling, because of everybody was fighting for licenses. All the crooked fellows had licenses, and I think Najib Balala tried a bit to clean it up, but I think also the cartels also got to him. We have not had anything of progress on the mineral sands mining, and from all the reports I've seen, there are enough deposits there to completely change Kenya's economy. Nothing is happening.
Okay.
And you know, it's also about the personality and the character of a cabinet secretary. Some ministries are huge, But if the personality of the person managing that ministry is not as big, then the ministry's image goes down. I can give you numerous examples. When Deputy President William Ruto was the Minister for Higher Education, it was just a department then. But when he went there, he made it look like a very big ministry. John Mishuki, the late, was the Minister for Environment at one point. It was a small ministry then, but when he took over, it became a big ministry. Joseph Olelenku, when he was the Minister for Interior Affairs, did it look like a big ministry?
I will not answer.
And when somebody like the late Joseph Nkaiseri took it over, you realize the magnitude of that ministry. So,
but Shuri, is that about? And I just called you our in-house name, which is Shuri. Okay, Gashuri, but is that really about the performance and the competence of the person? Is that more about being PR savvy, etc.? Maybe blame the PR firm that does,
one of the considerations that I think the president and the deputy will be making is to appoint people into the cabinet, people who can be able to carry the image and the personality of the ministry that they are going to run. People who can be able to tell the country what their ministry is doing. But if you get a person who is comfortable to chill out as the minister, then a lot of stuff will be happening in that ministry, but nobody seems to know what is happening. Because a ministry like that of mining is a very important ministry, especially as the country tries to expand in terms of generating income. I think mining is one of those ministries that should be out there showing or showcasing what it is doing. And the best person to do that, no other than the minister.
Fiscally?
Well, it's interesting because the question that Prof was asking is one question we asked when the ministry came up. Because it was like, where is this ministry from? And for we budget heads, we really hate when ministries are broken up into pieces because it becomes very difficult to track performance over a long period of time. But anyway, so the ministry is definitely small, just crossed 1 billion shillings the other day. So it's pretty small. But one of the big things that you see listed in this year's budget about its achievements is actually the Mining Act. But then the question then definitely connects to what Macharia is asking of, so what has come of that? And so it's very difficult to think of what this ministry has to do, because from the times of Balala, the big thing that was marketed even in our budget documents was this aerial survey of minerals across the country. So it was there, I think, in the first 2 years in the budgets, then it kind of went silent. Then it's popped up again in 2017, 2018, but the language in the budget is the repair of an aeroplane that I think needs to do that.
Whereas they're talking about countrywide airborne geophysical survey, but so they want to repair an airplane.
Yeah, so if you go to the program, there's actually a sub-program that speaks about repairing an aeroplane. So you wonder, so what were we doing in the first 2 years when we thought that's what we were straight away going into, mapping these minerals? And now it seems we've realized, that was not the right thing. So it really kind of gets you wondering what the
plane
policy
was not working.
Probably.
Okay, gosh. So is that a go from everyone? Oh my goodness.
I'll say go.
Go.
It will be breaking news once again if it's...
Oh my goodness. Gosh, okay, I feel like saying the views expressed on this program are not mine. Let's move on to another CS now, Honorable Fred Matiang'i. He has previously been the Cabinet Secretary for ICT, where he oversaw digital migration and then was moved to education after the challenges that faced Jacob Kaimenyi. And after the death of the Interior CS, he took over as Acting Internal Security CS. So he is a bit of a rock star, generally speaking, and appears to be President Kenyatta's fixer and is known by some to be ruthlessly efficient. He substantively heads the delicate education ministry now, and as I mentioned earlier, is acting as the lead in the complex security ministry. Prof, let's go blow by blow with these two ministries. So first, how has he performed in education?
You see, Fred Matiang'i is an example of what a minister should do. They can give you money, they can give you a big chair to sit on, but you must be innovative, you must give direction. So his ruthlessness is not really bad. Look at what he did at the Kenya National Examination Council. We had been used and even normalized stealing of exams. The guy came and said, this thing is not true. Even your kids are getting wrong grades. He has done so. So this guy, I think, he's like the Michuki of Kibaki's administration. Uhuru should not even be persuaded to think otherwise. He should just close his eyes and appoint Matiang'i back to education. If you look at what he has done, with the same spirit of innovation, some spirit of, putting his hands on the job he has been given, waking up very early, while his colleagues probably are still enjoying their morning sleep. He is awake, flying across the country, dealing with police issues, but also dealing with examination. The man has energy and he has inspiration. This is the guy that I think keeps on reading Article 10 of the Constitution, national values and the principles of governance, and specifically patriotism. So he's a good example that even our president should not be ashamed to cite as one of the fellows that if every minister had that imagination, like we were praying that if every minister had the imagination that Michuki had under Kibaki, this country would be very far. You know that that place had a minister in education. We have had Ngaiseri, he could still do the two jobs. But then I think let him remain in education and let's look for another person to do. We can get, I think he has fixed a lot of things in the education sector. So let's look for another person for security.
Mashari, what do you think about his handling of security?
I don't like his handling of security. He can be overbearing, he can be brutal and dictatorial. And I would say all this kind of police brutality we are seeing must land on his doorstep. But I'd still want him to retain. But in education, where he has unfinished business and where he has a real passion. And beyond the National Examinations Council, there is the public universities that must be sorted out. I've had a discussion with him on that while he, when he was a substantive at, before he was diverted to security. And really he was concerned that there is a big problem where you have campuses sprouting all over. Above boardings and lodgings and brothels, you find university of something. And they don't even have lecturers. They don't have teachers. They don't have equipment, nothing. And he was very determined to put a stop to that. He has recently announced a moratorium on universities setting up satellite campuses. That needs to be fixed because we're going to end up getting up a generation of people with degrees but with no learning. So that's good. My fear is that he also has political ambitions. Already he is making himself the prefect of Kisii. And I can see him running for political office the next time around. And
you think so?
Yes.
Okay, as what?
I think he'll want to be something, maybe, you never know, maybe a deputy president or something.
Okay. Gashuri, what do you think of Matiang'i?
If it is not broken, don't fix it. I would think that he's best suited to stay in the Ministry of Education. I think he's done a better job there, and probably the president would be compelled to retain him there. For the simple reason that if you get the education system right, you get very many things right. But for the Ministry of Interior, I think that is a docket that requires some balance. Somebody who is rough, but at the same time somebody who can be able to engage with a bit of diplomacy. He, as Mashari says, he comes out as a bit more abrasive, and sometimes that antagonizes very many people, and especially from a political point of view.
Is it necessary that the Minister for Interior be somebody who is a security professional?
Not necessarily,
not really.
But I would think you'd need somebody who is very strategic, somebody who has a very good understanding of matters of running the country and governance, basically. Somebody who can be able to engage, because I mean, the minister does not go out there policing, arresting people, taking them to court and so on and so forth. His is more of a policy job. If you get somebody who is right in terms of policy generation, I think you'll get it right. I'm inclined to think that he should remain in the Ministry of Education.
I just have one more question in terms of, both of you talking about the fact that he can be seen by some to be abrasive, and yet the same could actually be said of his predecessor, the late Nkaiseri, but for him it was seen as an asset. He was, especially after coming after Lenku, that there needed to be, somebody who was not just tough talking, but tough looking and tough. And that was actually an asset given terrorism.
Let me tell you the difference. With Nkaiseri, it was about tackling terrorism and banditry and all those things. With Matiang'i, it has become about containing the opposition. Right. So his toughness is not in combating terrorism. It is about combating the opposition. That is the difference. And that is where he fails. And
the security docket is also very political in nature. So you need somebody who can balance something.
It's really about good governance. You don't have to be a security man. You don't have to be a cop or an ex-cop. But it's really about more governance more than security. security is the end product, but I think you're really talking about governance, and you also need to be able to look at the causes of some of these conflicts we have, rather than just sending in soldiers every time to kill people. You really also have to address it from the root cause, and maybe that is where the solutions lie. And that is why it's about governance more than just about shooting your way to you know.
And then, you must also remember that we will have a very political season, bearing in mind that there is the unfinished business that the Jubilee team has with the opposition. There's also the succession politics. A lot of things will be happening politically in this season between now and 2022. So if you have a person in charge of the security docket who is seen to be a bit harsh on the opposition team, then you have a problem there.
All right. So it sounds like stay in education is what I'm gathering from you all. I'm going to move on quickly now to a related ministry, that of Defense, and its Cabinet Secretary, Ambassador Rachel Awor-Omamo. The mandate of the ministry, of course, is to defend and protect the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the Republic, to assist and cooperate with other authorities in situations of emergency and disaster, and upon approval by the National Assembly may be deployed to restore peace and order in any part of Kenya affected by unrest or instability. She is now an in-law of the First Family and hasn't gained political acceptance in terms of her regional background, but she is, of course, a woman who is holding one of the more powerful dockets in government. Prof, but she has also suffered what I would say is a really unfortunate stereotype, that of being accused of being more of a ceremonial, head of the Ministry of Defense rather than a substantial cabinet secretary giving directive. What do you think of that kind of thing that she's had to fight from the very day that she was, appointed?
Yes, she hasn't fought very well, because you wonder, anytime there is a crisis or some matter to be sorted out in the Ministry of Defense, you always think that another person is doing her job, and you think she's being told what to do.
But why? Just because she's a woman?
No, it has nothing to do with that. She can still do things like the ones Amina Mohammed has done, and we would still give her the accolades. But in terms of putting, sticking out her nose to say this is what we want to do as Minister of Defense, again, we don't feel what she wants us to do, how he wants us to look at the Kenyan armed forces. We only hear about her when some action has taken place in Somalia once in a while, but it looks like she has just been pushed to go and say ABCD.
But is that by the nature of the defense docket and the way in which the military tends to operate, that you don't expect them to be calling presses all the time? They tend to prefer the cover of secrecy, if you like.
Yes, they could do that, but on the general guidelines, she's representing the executive, and therefore we need to hear her voice. Like, for example, we have had problems. Some people have asked questions: do we want our soldiers to remain, our army to remain, military to remain in Somalia, or come out? I expect her to speak from an authoritative point of view and say, answer the opposition, for example, which has been saying they must pull out, and she must give the nation a certain description of her view about how she wants the military to operate in Somalia, and persuade the Republic that she thinks staying in Somalia is the right thing. You don't hear that coming out. In fact, sometimes you hear some of those things coming from the Minister of Foreign Affairs, or sometimes even the President himself talking about. So we haven't heard her voice. She has not imposed her personality in the Minister of Defense. Actually, she has been a little dry, and I don't feel her. I don't know what she stands for in terms of defense. She could still be retained, but not in defense.
Sure.
I don't see what value she adds to this cabinet. She's obviously completely lost in defense.
Yeah.
Why do you say that?
And I would say we do not have a substantive defense minister.
Why do you say she's completely lost? What's the basis of that? We have a lot of defense issues, but of course there is the war in Somalia, and so many other things, and so many questions being asked whether it is about procurement or corruption. She is never there to provide leadership. The defense, the armed forces, the Kenya Defense Forces are not an autonomous institution.
the subservient to civilian authority. She represents the civilian authority, but you don't see it. And I have been in a situations at defense headquarters when there's a press or something, and you can see that she's just a wallflower there. I've seen them shifting around chairs so that she does not sit on the chair of the
Chief of Defense.
Of the Chief of Defense. That would not have happened to her predecessors.
Do you think that may be because she's also not from a military background?
You don't have to be from a military background.
But we do hear of these things where when somebody, an outsider, is sort of brought into one of these security-related fields, not just the army, but also, you know, internal security, the police, that, you know, the rank and file take exception to that they want one of their own promoted.
Not necessarily. I think there have been many defense ministers who are not, have had absolutely no security background.
I don't know that there have been many.
How many have we, who was there before her?
That's a good question.
There was Jenka Karume, briefly. There was then for a long time under Moi there was no defense minister because he had killed the post and become the defense minister. And I feel
even James Kishuru.
There was James Kishuru.
Yes.
But even now, I think Uhuru is the defense minister, and I think the generals report to him rather than to her. She's just there to pass the time.
There are civilian issues in the defense ministry that I think she should have played that role probably in a much better way. Every so often we hear of widows of military officers who die in the line of duty, but every so often you hear lamentations, they have not been compensated, they're still in problems, and I think that is that's one of the key roles that as a civilian, and the cries of the widows are civilian in nature. So I'm not sure.
In any case, any questions which will be asked about the defense forces, she should be the one standing up there to answer them, and answer them with authority.
So it's a go from the three of you?
Not disappear.
Okay, fair enough. It's a go from the three of you, clearly. Dear me.
Let us go.
Okay, let's just, I want you to join the twin issues of internal security and defense, and both these dockets are some that, you know, many have argued do not get proper accounting oversight. So, you know, the Auditor General is not able to tell specifically how their giant budgets are spent, and to what extent do you think these CSs should also be accountable for promoting, you know, more accountability in these dockets?
So from the background, you know, the Auditor General a few years ago complained that the Ministry of Defense was not opening up, especially on the development side of the budget. And even if you look at the budget right now, especially for defense, basically we just have one line, which is KDF, and we assume that that's just their pay and whatever operations and maintenance they have. The development side, we don't know what it has, so for security reasons, we are not supposed to know how many bazookas we are buying and so on. So that is not open to the public. But then it becomes a bit of an issue when the Auditor General complains that he also cannot access those books to audit them. The picture is slightly different on the interior side, where you have the police, because there you have a bit more detail, but more still on the recurrent side. And if you look at both ministries, they are recurrent heavy. So basically what you see in the budget is really the HR side. You have to pay people, so it's very easy for us to say you paid people. But then there are many other functions that these ministries play, and if that is not open to public scrutiny and also the Auditor General, then there are very many questions that will be asked in terms of are we using our money prudently, and all the big monies that are allocated to those ministries, are we actually getting value for money? If we can't answer those questions, then it means we have to hold into account.
Like what, for instance, what aircraft are we buying? What model is it? From which country? Could we have done better?
I think in a modern state, some of those things need not be secret. In fact, we might not be told, but you go and get Jane's Defense Weekly. Those details will be there. They'll be there in the Washington Post. They'll be there in the New York Times, that Kenya is buying this from Israel, this from India, this from the United States, this from Brazil. These things are not hidden.
Okay.
Our secrecy is not about security. Our secrecy is about theft. Because the defense and security budgets is where money just disappears down deep black holes. Don't forget, even Goldenberg was disguised as a security issue.
Okay.
And Anglo-leasing. And so many other things.
And you know, when Francis, you raised that matter, you see, Rachel Mama, when she was appointed at first time, people argued that because she's the daughter to Odongo Mamo, and Odongo Mamo used to support Jomo Kenyatta very much to fight Jaramogi, then it probably she's just being rewarded. But so she needed to play that role to show people that she's just beyond those past loyalties. She's a different person now, and she can do her own job despite the fact that she's the daughter of Odongo Mamo. But now, even in the defense, she remains the daughter of Odongo Mamo. That is not very good.
What I wanted to say is in line with what Macharia is saying. When audit issues are raised and CSS have to come to Parliament to answer questions before the PIC or the PSC, and especially security-related questions, you see even Parliament saying this is a closed-door session. They don't want to allow people to go in. But every so often when you listen to even inside sources, the members of Parliament will be telling you they're dealing with questions running into millions of shillings because of that secrecy. But it is not necessarily secrecy because you want to protect the country from knowing what apparatus, equipments are being bought. It's because of the whole question of procurement.
And you know something,
the millions involved.
this secrecy has not always been there. It was developed during Moi's time. I remember during Jomo Kenyatta's time, when I was in high school, we could open the newspaper and see, oh, Kenya is buying 5 new Hawker Siddeley jet fighters from Britain at such and such a cost. We're getting so many F5 jets from the US at such and such a cost. We're getting 13 new battle, tanks or armored cars. This information was there.
Okay.
And the secrecy came with Moi's time, and that secrecy, as I said again, is to do with theft, not with security.
Okay, we have like 3 more to go through, gentlemen, and only 10 minutes. So if we could skim through them real quick. CS Phyllis Kandie is up next. I think you all said that was a no. Macharia is laughing right off the bat. Look at you, Macharia.
I will not even comment.
I don't even, just don't let me read my notes. So she is previously the Cabinet Secretary for Tourism. She was later moved after the appearance of non-performance. She's now the Minister for Labour and East African Affairs. The mandate there being the formulation and review and implementation of social security, employment programs for persons with disabilities, national human resource planning and development, national labour productivity, workplace inspection and workmen's compensation, and many other things. Right from her vetting, there were questions about her ability to communicate effectively and articulate government position, but she is one of the few women in government. She has largely shied away from the media and has been accused of non-performance in the labor sector as well, owing to the numerous industrial actions, which, to be frank, precede her. It has always been a problem, but you know, her response to it has also been doubtful. But some of her achievements: the introduction of the East Africa Community Passport. She oversaw the enactment of Kenya's East Africa Integration Policy. Oh, this is an unfortunate comment, I should say. She seemed to have overseen the decline of trade between East African partner states. There's been the bilateral agreement between Kenya and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, which is positive in terms of recruitment of domestic workers and giving them more rights and more protection. So that's seen as, you know, a positive thing that she's you know, presided over. There's the older persons cash transfer program. So far there are 710,200 beneficiaries, and the government is set to expand this number starting January 2018, covering all deserving persons over the age of 70. First, I think we've agreed that the ministry is a bit awkwardly lumped, you know, having East Africa and the Labour Ministry. But having said that, can His Excellency do without her, Prof?
Yes, I think every regime makes a mistake, and this was a big mistake.
That is your opening statement?
Yes, every regime makes a mistake, and you should forgive them. They are not perfect. I think they overrated her ability to make things happen, push them to the next level. And so she has been struggling. You can see it. Even when there have been labor problems, she struggles to get things working. I think she was not cut out for a cabinet post. She was cut out for something else. I don't doubt her education. But in terms of, you know, matching her professionalism with the political nature of the job she's performing, I think she's not cut out for that. I don't want to be unfair to her. She's a gentle lady. I just want to say that probably the president can consider giving her a different job, not light duties, but a different job that she can do to serve
the infamous
yes, she can serve the republic in a different way. I think she has been given a good time to serve our republic, and she tried. You could see her trying from day one when she was unable to do the interviews well. Up to now, we haven't seen a change with what the impression she gave on the first time she was given the interview.
So it's a go for you.
So in my opinion, not to be too harsh to her, I think she can be given a different responsibility, and so she exits the cabinet.
Okay, I want to move on to Dr. Cleopa Mailu. He, of course, is the Cabinet Secretary for Health. You know, and is quite, you know, the technical professional in that respect. He's a graduate from University of Nairobi, specializing in genetics. I think he's also a graduate from the University of Glasgow, an alumni, beg your pardon, of Strathmore in advanced management. He was the first African to be the CEO of Nairobi Hospital, which only had European administrators for over half a century. He's worked with UNICEF, with WHO. He took over from James Macharia, who then ended up being moved to another, you know, ministry. But of course, the Ministry of Health has seen its share of problems. Some say partly because it is one of those functions that is devolved health. So, I mean, there have been lots of progress. They talk about the free maternal health care, talking about increasing ICU coverage and in terms of hospitals and bed capacity, increase of antiretroviral drugs, increase of malaria nets given out. But there have been challenges in dealing with sporadic outbreaks of cholera and malaria in a number of counties, the paralyzing and embarrassing health workers strikes that the country has seen. And of course, there was that small issue of the 5 billion purported scam in the ministry. So no facts on that one yet. Macharia, what do you think?
I think Dr. Mailu is a classic example of the fact that academic and professional and experience are not everything. There's something more. He came with great challenges. The medics strike, doctors and nurses and everybody else. I would say he failed flat. And he failed flat because he did not care. Because he came from the private health services, he had actually no clue that Kenyans depend on public health services. And for him, it was not a big deal. What shocked me was one time in the middle of the crisis, when he said that they cannot increase doctors' salaries because then the doctors working in the private hospitals will also demand salary increases, and that will be bad for business. You know, that is his mindset, and really, that is a man who should have gone yesterday.
But is, you know, devolution, the implementation of devolution, you know, equally compounded that problem?
Of course, there was devolution, and that created some problem over who takes responsibility and who resolves the issues. But even with devolution, at the end of the day, there is somebody who represents the national government, and that person should be able to understand the issue and look for solutions. He was not looking for solutions. His worry was he did not understand how Kenyans are suffering because the public health sector is collapsing. He was more worried about how the his compatriots, his ex-buddies in private hospitals are doing.
You know, there are fundamental ministries that go to the heart of the ordinary citizens: health,
education,
water, education, security. If you don't get it right there, then there's a problem countrywide. I mean, when doctors are on strike for hundreds of days, when nurses are on strike for days on end,
longer even than doctors.
There's a problem. And yes, health is a devolved function, but policy generation is a function of the national government. And it's also a question about linkages. How do you deal with governors who are in charge of that health docket at the county level? Also, how do you deal with the doctors and the nurses and their organizations and their associations? I thought it was more of a question of being a neutral, fair, caring arbiter and broker when this row erupted. And probably if it was somebody who had a bit of a political acumen, the strikes would not have gone for as many days as they did. You're the person who sits in the cabinet, and one of your responsibilities as a cabinet secretary is to advise the president on issues touching on your docket. So if you're sitting in an office and doctors are on strike for more than 100 days, there's a big problem.
What do you think in terms of, was the 5 billion the scandal that never was? Or, I mean, what's going on with that?
Well, I don't know about the 5 billion really, but I think one of the things that connects to that is that we do see the Ministry of Health as one of those in the audit report that actually has an adverse opinion. So there are problems in that ministry, and probably we should not be surprised when we see allegations of corruption like those ones that we saw with that scandal. But I think generally the tricky balance for the Ministry of Health and anyone who is a minister there is actually how to balance out these functions of health that some are at the county and some that have remained at the national level. And as you see, the national government is taking some role in these conditional grants that they are giving to counties, you know, the free maternity one, we have the one on the foregone fees when you go to hospital. And we saw in the first few years, it's like the ministry had some challenge to decide how they are going to allocate that money to which counties. The criteria that was going into the conditions did not seem clear, and it was confusing to us why the ministry that has been doing this for a very long time seemed lost with that. And even more interesting for me is that when you look at the absorption rate in the ministry, about, you know, on average it's been around 80%. So why are we not able to spend about a fifth of the budget that is going to the ministry at the national level? So there is a couple of challenges. I think there are a couple of challenges that the minister has not really sorted out there. And the question for us has always been, how easy is it for us to track that over time? Because when we pass the budget and there are all these nice programs, if you look at the Ministry of Health, you know, immunization and the rest, but when you come to the implementation reports we see later, they are not really in that line. We cannot track, you know, they say they are going to immunize 85 children by 2016, 2017, but when we come to the implementation report, that kind of information is not missing. And this is not just secluded for the Ministry of Health, but as Gashuri is saying, these are things that are really, you know, touching with the common mwananchi, and if we are not able to see progress, then we see underspending, then we come to ask questions about what exactly is happening in that ministry.
But you know, he missed the ship, actually, just a quick chip before we go. He missed the ship. When there is a crisis, he failed to turn this crisis of doctors and nurses to demonstrate how good he is as a leader. So he didn't provide leadership. He sat on the fence, and it was a disgrace. You know, it's not right.
Oh dear. Now let's finish with then James Macharia. He was initially the Minister of Health, but then of course later moved to Transport after the exit of Engineer Michael Kamau, who left under a wave of allegations of corruption. He heads the Ministry of Transport and Infrastructure, whose mandate is to position Kenya as a logistics hub for the region by creating a modern and efficient transport system for goods and services within the country. Some of the achievements, obviously the SGR, whose phase 1 was completed ahead of time, and the second phase is already being embarked on. They're developing urban roads to decongest cities and major towns, and you can see several of those bypasses being worked on. There have been issues in terms of authorities that are under this ministry, like NTSA, which is seen to be struggling in terms of the management of road accidents and enforcement, which is sketchy on and off. There's been, some would say, a better level of improvement in the operations of the Port of Mombasa, etc. What do you think, gentlemen? Is he a keeper?
Infrastructure is one of the drivers of the economy, basically. While you see grand projects that have been carried out by the Jubilee administration in the first term, there are still questions about the cost. And I think that's one of the major issues that they have to deal with, and especially the minister in charge. I suspect he could be retained for purposes of continuity and for purposes of the grand projects that are going on. But also, he has to deal with the question, if he is retained in that ministry, then he has also to deal with the question of equitable distribution of these projects. Because every so often you hear there are some areas that are still lagging behind in terms of distribution of these projects, and especially distribution of roads and so on and so forth. So I would say 50-50 for him. 50-50.
All right.
I think the minister could be retained, but he has a lot of things to fix. The chaos in the transport sector. You know, I don't know at what point he allowed NTSA to operate like police officers, some of them lying below some trees and waiting for police, sending police to harass motorists. They work like an extension of the police force. So in fact, they have been infected by the same problems that you have in the police force. He needs to fix that. But I think he has some accolades. You see, he tries to work hard. I remember when we had a crisis at the Kenya Airways. You see, he's not a guy who runs away from the crisis. He goes there, and that is good leadership. But in terms of solving the critical problems of the roads, the traffic jams, we are blaming everything in Nairobi to Sonko, the governor. But we need a proper policy implementation approach, and it should come from the minister on how we can fix our problems on the roads, including the road carnage. A lot of things need to be done. Maybe he can say he has not stayed long in the ministry, but probably he deserves a second chance.
Sharia.
I would retain him, but on probation.
Yeah, second chance.
What I say is this: a lot of the things which the successes of that ministry are successes he inherited from his predecessor, and in fact, dating back to the Kibaki government, or in all those big projects, whether it is SGR or the network of roads and everything else. We have not seen specifically what he can do, but he has run with them. He has kept them on time and on schedule. But like Prof was saying, beyond mega projects, where he needs to take a close look at procurement issues, because there are big issues there. This thing of public transport, matatus have become a law unto their own. Okay, we need a Mishuki there to tame them.
Yes.
Okay, NTSA is so busy cracking down on me when I do 5 miles over the speed limit, and then a matatu overtakes me doing 100 miles over the speed limit,
and nothing happens.
Or a Mirat van coming down the other way at some crazy speed, and those things have the autonomy of the roads. Matatus, every day we are seeing them, not just upcountry matatus, you know, the Eldoret Nairobi route, whatever. Just here, Rongai, crazy. And because it has become a political thing, they are untouchable. NTSA does not touch them. It needs a minister who will come and say, no, we must fix this mess. We must bring sanity. This border culture, it is not only Kenya that has motorbikes. Who gave our motorbikes immunity from the rules of the road? They do not stop at junctions. They do not stop at traffic lights. They just go against the traffic. Surely, and the policemen are there watching them.
So is that enforcement, traffic police, or is that the CS?
They go together.
Okay.
They go together.
They're always with the NTSA.
They go together.
Okay. The questions of, you know, the spending.
Well, clearly the ministry that CS Macharia runs is the blue-eyed ministry of this government. If you look at the allocations to that ministry in the last few years, it's really shot up. In fact, it's the first time that we've seen the infrastructure sector actually get a higher allocation than education. And in the first 2 years of the Jubilee government, we saw a big struggle in spending in that ministry, and it was dancing around 40% and so on. But in the last 2 years, it's really shot up, and it's now above 80%. So there is definitely something that has gone right there, including the push to get the SGR done on time. So that could be one of the reasons why. But I think as the president keeps thinking about the corruption issue, all these ministries that are under CS Macharia also have serious audit queries that have been asked of them. So when you have the ministry having adverse opinion in continuous years, then there's something to look at. And I think, as Macharia is saying, as you go looking into procurement, because these are big infrastructure ministries, then it means there's a lot of procurement that you have to think about. Then it's important for us to keep looking at these audit queries, because the audit queries are not just about money being lost. Sometimes you spend the money right, but the process by which you got there is actually questionable and could present loopholes that could be used in future for corruption purposes. So it's important to keep looking, even as these ministries that seem to be doing well, the reasons why they are turning up in audit reports, then is something that needs to be looked at.
Okay, so it is stay on probation.
Yes, it's maybe one more year.
All the authority of opinion court to say that. Okay,
Yes.
I thank you all for that snapshot of this CSS. So we got through, I think, about 9 or so, but 10 cabinet dockets because of Matiang'i holding a dual one, and we'll continue with the rest on opinion court next week. But we were asking you a poll question that's been running on social media, which is whether the president should keep his cabinet, and you really do not want him to do that. It's like a big 82% no. Thank you so much for voting, and of course for taking part in our conversation. That's our time. God bless you, God bless Kenya, and good night.